boils and ghouls. You are now tuned in to PVD Horror Podcast. Pleasant screams.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to PVD Horror. This is Dave. I'm joined with my co-host, Brandon. And today we have a special guest, Rodney Barnes. He is an American screenwriter, producer, comic book writer. He's worked on so many projects in TV and film, which we will dig into, and worked on so many comics from like Marvel to Star Wars to Blacula, Return of the King, and then has his latest comic, Crownsville, available for sale as of November 5th. Rodney, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
No problem. Now, Rodney, I noticed that you're from the Maryland area, you know what I mean? So I had family, my mom and my family, they grew up on her side, they grew up down that area in Baltimore. So, I would kind of go down as a kid and kind of, visit family members and stuff like that. And so my experience with Maryland, it's always been like, it's a tough area. How was it like for you growing up down that end?
I grew up in the first, I guess, 16, 17 years I was in Annapolis, Maryland. Then I went to live with my father in Baltimore for a short period of time afterwards. So it's a tale of two different lifestyles. Baltimore is more urban. It's more of what you would expect, an urban environment to be. Annapolis is more of a touristy town. So two completely different ways to grow up. So I wasn't in The Wire. I didn't have the Wire experience.
I'm
aware of it, but that wasn't too much of my life.
Yeah,
that's good.
No, that's cool, because that's the thing, growing up and then seeing that, The Wire on TV, and I would always put those pieces together, and I was like, man, this is so realistic, and so like the writing for that show was just so great. But overall, and I like Dave said before we had you with the intro and everything, we're such big fans of you, and we appreciate you coming on, because this is very big. We see you from on social media to so many different platforms now, and you like take advantage of it, and you're so rooted with the horror genre, you know what I mean? And you focus on a lot of that stuff. And I want to just say that you use social media like to the T of like, for everybody that's out there doing it. You touch on different topics. You have a new podcast called Run Fool Podcast, where you praise characters who choose to run away.
Yes.
How was it like starting that up for you?
All of these, horror in general, when I came to LA in 94, 95, I wanted to be in a horror genre space. Couldn't break in. Comedy came first. The early sitcoms and the animated stuff. So that all came first. And I struggled to get into horror, but I didn't want to let it go. So when the opportunity to get into comics came about, that was first with Philadelphia as far as horror is concerned. I did superhero books first, but that evolved into Philadelphia and some of the other stuff I've done with Image and now other publishers as well. And I just wanted to keep that part of it alive. It's like horror was the first love. And a lot of times when you get into the business of Hollywood, you can become jaded and it can become a job like anything. And horror was closer to the fanboy in me and the thing that I idealized and looked at more from a romantic point of view than just business. So because we have social media, because we have comics, because we have podcasts and things that you can indulge in without a huge number financially to get into, you can just do it. I wanted to be part of the community as much as it was commerce. So that's what you see.
Yeah. Now, growing up, a lot of people, I heard before, like, cause like you're a tall man, so you always use that as your advantage, because growing up for me, it was like facial hair, having a beard. You were able to kind of like get into certain movies you weren't able to see. You wasn't supposed to be seeing at that time. What was it like for you to kind of like take that on and just, add that into it to kind of see some of your favorite movies on the big screen?
It was an odd experience because I'm an only child, even though I have a lot of half brothers and sisters. Another story for another day. But we had 5 or 6 movie theaters in my community in Annapolis. So it was a lot of movies. Virtually everything that came through that area in one way or another, I was exposed to. So the way it worked was by day, you would have the Disney movies. And this was during a period with Kurt Russell, Computer that Wore Tennis Shoes, or Flubber, or, those movies. And then around midday, 4 or 5 o'clock, the adult movies would come. And if you just stayed long enough, you could get through the kid movie and nobody was coming in to check. It wasn't like going to the mall today and going to the movies. You could end up in a John Carpenter, The Bug, or Halloween, or Amityville Horror, or The Exorcist, or Chuck Norris movies, or, movies of the time. So I got an opportunity to see both, to have both experiences. And it wasn't like today where, a movie will stay in theaters as long as it's making money. You had a weekend, and then next week another movie was coming, another movie was coming. And so if you didn't see it now, you were going to miss it. So I would stay in the movies from 10 o'clock in the morning till damn near midnight sometimes, according to what was playing. So a lot of movies, a lot of movies.
Now, what are some of your favorites?
Always the horror. I mean, The Exorcist, I remember seeing in the theater as a child. Any of those, the blaxploitation movies, the martial arts stuff, any of that stuff was sort of kind of for a kid that's living in a small town. You don't typically get exposed to that life.
Yeah. We were just kind of like talking about that, myself and Dave, because, like our parents, we always talk about how like Jaws and Exorcist are like the highlights of horror films for them. For you being able to take on, our end of horror, what are some horror films that you have seen in the theaters that kind of give you that same feeling of seeing The Exorcist or Jaws on the big screen today?
Not a whole lot. It's not a whole lot today that hits me the same way. And I'll say a lot of it has to do with just having seen so much that by this time you start to connect and say, oh, they're doing The Exorcist again. Oh, they're doing, okay, that came from that. That was the thing. All right. And you see the influences in today's movies from the things that you've already seen. It was probably that way with, older people who got an opportunity to see those movies in my time. They don't feel quite as new. Every once in a while, a movie like Weapons or something like that will give you that charge of just really being able to sit back and enjoy a good movie that feels original, feels like the voice of the filmmakers. That sort of gets me the closest. I don't think I could articulate that when I was a kid in the same way, but now voices, new voices. If you see a Jordan Peele movie, you can tell it's a Jordan Peele movie. Story-wise. Ryan Coogler, same thing. You can feel them in the thing. So, yeah.
Yeah. I was also thinking we see so damn much too, like in general in life, right? So we're all desensitized a little bit. So I don't even know if it's like, hearing the stories about opening night at, seeing The Exorcist and people fainting or, having these huge reactions. I don't even know that we can have those huge reactions because we see worse things on the news. So
exactly. And that's a great point as well. I think, during that period of time in the early mid 70s into the 80s, I don't think America you weren't desensitized to mass shootings or, this is before 9/11. This is before like that idea that we're not safe.
Yeah.
So the real world has its own sort of built in, as you're saying, your own built in stuff that desensitizes you to a lot of what horror is. And I don't think the goal is the same. When I see a lot of horror films today, they seem like more thrill rides and more of sound, jump scares, that type of thing, more so than the slow burn horror films where you really get to know characters. You think about it, if you watch The Exorcist, some of those cuts, it takes 45 minutes before, in quotes, something happens by today's standards. He's in Iraq, he's doing the dig. You get to Georgetown, you see mom and kid getting along, and she's an actress, and there's this before she says, I'm going to die up there, or whatever she says when she pees during the party.
Yeah.
It's like, that's when, in quotes, something happens. And today you would get that in the opening credits down.
Right. Yeah. We assume nobody has attention spans anymore. So we
so
feel like we have to
jumping.
rush it. Yeah.
We got to get right in within that first 5 minutes. What is this movie about? who done it?
Hmm.
Why am I here? That type of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, like I said, I brought up the podcast Run Fool.
Hmm.
There's one episode that I truly love on there. It's the Black Aggie when you're talking
Ah,
about your
yeah.
grandmother,
Hmm.
because for me, for my introduction into horror was from my grandmother, so just hearing you kind of like talk about that and kind of incorporate all that into that story, I think that was truly special. What was it like for you to, put that story together?
Oh, it's heartwarming. I mean, the Run Fool podcast, as we know it now, will end probably Halloween of this year. But the opportunity that I've had to talk about my childhood, influences from my childhood, my grandmother's huge influence because she was my
Hmm.
primary babysitter when my mother
Hmm.
was in college,
Yeah.
and Kolchak the Night Stalker, movies of the week. Who gave me the money to see these movies that I saw? That
Yep.
was my grandmother. And every once in
Yep.
a while, if I was lucky and she was in a good mood, and she would be folding clothes and she would just tell me a story. And these were the most bizarre, macabre stories of like sort of old time country horror, the ghosts and things. And
Mhm.
it's like campside stories, like when you're by the campfire, when you're camping and somebody tells you a ghost story. My grandmother would tell me those kinds of stories. And I think for a long time I took it for granted and I thought everybody's grandmother did this. And when I found out it was sort of unique, it was like, okay, if I'm going to do a podcast format where I'm telling scary stories for a half hour, what better intro and is than my grandmother and our relationship? Because I've always liked stories, and one of the reasons why I love Stephen King so much is there's a human construct. There's some types of relationship dynamic, father, son, family, something that walks with the horror that I
Yeah.
believe makes it more relatable to me. If you look at Frankenstein, Dracula, some of the older stories, they were basically about what they were about. There was something under them, whether it was immigration, fear of war, or that type of thing, but they were pretty straightforward in what they were. And here, when King and those guys, and Richard Matheson as well, and Anne Rice to a degree, there was something human that was happening as well that was relatable, that drew me in. And that sort of was what inspired Runful.
That's awesome. Um,
Now,
Go ahead, Brandon. Sorry.
for the Run Fool, like you said, we touched on the characters that ran away. Who were
Mm.
some of your favorite characters that were just, on screen that just would take off?
Um, it was funny. I haven't seen a lot of them. I have one of
Hmm.
my mentors in the business would always talk about the problem with logic, that if everybody in movies did what they were supposed to do, you probably wouldn't have a movie.
No.
People have to do things that frustrate the audience and go, that person should die. I think about in Halloween, there were so many instances where beyond Jamie Lee Curtis, so many people should have run. And they
Yeah.
stood there and what was that? They hear a noise and they want to go and inspect and see what the noise is. I've always appreciated when a character would do what I would do, especially younger, getting the hell out of there. And the whole Run Fool name, my grandmother was like, why don't they just run? And it seemed like the obvious thing. This is before, of course, writing stories. And so that whole idea of Run Fool, you know.
Yeah. I always like to highlight Roger from Night of the Demons because he
Yeah,
just took off. You know what I mean? I'm
yeah,
like, This is what I would do."
that's
But
what you would
he,
do. And
he,
then if
he,
they die honorably. Like even in War of the Worlds, the Tom Cruise one,
yeah,
they ran.
Yeah.
yeah,
They had laser beams, the
Yeah.
aliens did, where they could zap them, but they tried to get away. I can respect that. You died with honor. But
yeah,
because you went up in the attic because you heard something at 2 a.m, you kind of sort of deserved it.
Yeah.
yeah.
You were asking.
Investigating always will
Exactly.
get you killed.
Nope. I can hire somebody to investigate when I'm outside on the lawn, especially if I got a cell phone.
Even in
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
like newer films, it's frustrating. Like
Mhm,
in Weapons, Julia
mhm,
Garner's character investigates a lot, and I'm like, "Are you
Mhm.
crazy? What are you doing?" And they leave
yes.
the door open behind them when they investigate too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
Even when they tell you not to go across the salt line, I'm giving you what
yeah,
not to do. I'm
yeah,
gonna listen to a witch. I've watched you abuse my family.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
My family didn't listen and they're poking themselves in the face with a fork. I'm gonna do everything you say.
Right, right. That's great.
And you also bring up characters that stayed when they shouldn't have. Who are some of your
Yes.
standout examples?
Um, Poltergeist is a big one. You know, I understand the love of Carol Ann, but you know, if any of my kids got stuck in the house and went through the TV, we'll connect at some point. You know, we'll figure out a way to reconnect and
Connect
have
at
a
some point.
reunion. There'll be something. You know, I'll bring the TV, put it in storage, and we'll work on it for a while. But I don't have to be in the house with the ghosts doing the
Right.
thing. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. For me, one of the standouts was Julius from Friday the 13th. Jason Takes Manhattan, the
mm,
fight on the, on the rooftop.
mhm.
Because for me growing up, seeing that, you never seen anybody fight Jason,
Right.
in his
Hand to
hands. And I'm
hand.
sitting there, I was
Yeah.
just like, oh, you're sitting there and invested into it. You're like, what the hell's happening? I mean, he's taking it there. I give this guy all the credit in the world, but when he got his head knocked off, I was just like, he went out like a G though, so that's so that
Kinda.
always
I would have gone out like a H. I would have run. I would have gone somewhere and gotten away. You would never have that moment to say, "Oh man, Rodney and Jason fought. He lost, but
Yeah.
man, it was close for a minute."
Oh my God. That's so
Yeah.
funny. He has no business trying to box Jason. So
Oh, Jason doesn't play fair. I've got 8 movies to show that he cheats.
Rodney, you worked on a lot of television as a writer, and some
Hmm.
big shows that are are very beloved, like Boondocks, Everybody Hates Chris,
Hmm.
and Wu-Tang: An American Saga, which
Mhm.
I thought was awesome. But one of the things I was curious about is it hard to so you know how like you do like an episode right in a show or you
Hmm.
do like multiple episodes, but like you're kind of picking up a story from where someone else left off at times,
Hmm.
and then it's like the understanding is that somebody else is probably going to write the future episodes. Is that challenging? Is that to kind of come on mid show and then you're writing something that is kind of
It's kind of
carrying
not
over?
how it. It's kind of not how it works.
Okay.
From virtually every instance, I'm there from the beginning, and we're crafting, like in the writers' room, we're crafting the entire season.
Okay.
Like we're working the whole thing. I just get assigned that episode, but I'm there for all of the episodes. You know, I can't think of a show where that hasn't been the
Yeah.
case. Somebody might be able to remind me, but more often than not, you know, I'm starting the season from the beginning and we're all building a world. And, you know, the emphasis when it's written by, I may write the first draft of that script, but it's coming back into the writer's room. It's going through the showrunner's hands if I'm not the showrunner. To varying degrees, my hands are in everything. You know, you think about a
Yeah.
show like the Boondocks, Uncle Ruckus and Grad, the older characters were kind of closer to me. Um, and all throughout, you know, I'm saying all those bad words and those things. It's even if I'm not, you know,
Yeah.
getting credit for the thing, I'm still kind of, my voice is in it.
I love hearing you explain that because I literally had no idea how that process
Yeah.
works. So
No,
that
we're in a
makes so
writer's
much more
room.
sense.
You're in a room with
Yeah.
12 hours a day with 5, 6, 7 people, sometimes 2 people. And you've got a big board, a whiteboard. I'm looking at a whiteboard in my mind.
Yeah.
And you're mapping out not just an episode, but an entire season of television. If it's serialized, for sure, how this connects to that and that connects to that. And you sort of know from when you start where you're going.
Yeah. Now that Wu-Tang show in particular, like for me, I like that feels like that would be such a project I would have so much excitement for just because it's a story that like through almost like urban legend or like when you watch them come up, seeing them in interviews on MTV, they would kind of walk you through their neighborhoods and stuff like that, so we would know them through like the things we would see from them in their interviews and stuff like that. But you're basically kind of like crafting a story to retell kind of their up and coming
Well,
their development. What was that project like?
um, well, I sat next to RZA every day for almost 2 years, and you know, various members of the Wu Tang Clan would come in or Zoom in or something and
Yeah.
talk to us about it. But you got RZA in the room, so he's kind of
Yeah.
guiding you through a process of what the world looked like. We have to put it into words and frame it into hopefully well-structured narrative. So, you know, we're there working with him. No, it's not that. Yes, it's this. And then we go to Staten Island, which I'll never do again in life. God bless Staten Island. They don't need me there. Coldest place I've ever been, most danger I've ever felt like I was in, at least for today's conversation.
Yeah.
But incredibly rewarding in the sense of respect that, these guys were able to do more than just be good at performing. If you look at what's under, the music, the way they were able to take pop culture, comic books, martial arts, all of the different influences that to this day, they're still relevant. They can still sell out huge venues. And when you get them all together, it's a magical experience. So, God bless them. But yeah, it was very rewarding for me, just very cold. Like we were shooting Battery Park 4 a.m. and it's like -5. And that was at the point where I said, I need to make more money. I need to do something else because I can't, I can't do this. So yeah.
Another project, given that I'm a Lakers fan and Dave's a Celtics fan, how did you find, the experience of working on Winning Time?
Very, very, very challenging, but also, when you walk through something that's difficult, because virtually everybody on the management side was someone like, an Oscar winner, an Emmy winner, some legendary actor. And then on the other side, you had a lot of people who had never acted before, but acted very little. So when you're managing two sides of a process, just being able to communicate various needs to actors and supporting them and directors and other producers in the way that they need helps you grow, and I've been doing this for a long time. So the continual challenge of more and different and finding places in myself where I have to get better sort of makes life interesting.
Yeah.
Now, could you discuss your appreciation for Blacula and how has that film impacted your life?
There was a period of time before my grandmother was watching me where my mother used to take me, our date nights, my mother and I would be going to the movies. And so I remember the trailer, if that's what they called them way back when, because they would only come on late, late, late at night. And like I said, I had very little supervision. So I'm watching shows I probably shouldn't have watched. But I saw the trailer for Blacula. And up until that point, I'd only seen like the Universal monsters or movies like them, like creature features, stuff that would come on Saturday nights at midnight. And I see this with an African American lead, and in a world that sort of mirrors the blaxploitation world that I become so fond of. So I had to see this movie. So my mother took me, and it was one of those audiences that was alive, where it was full of people talking to the theater, throwing popcorn at the screen, screaming like it was the most animated room I've been in to experience a movie. And that sort of did something to me. It made me, beyond just being entertained, it was an experience. And I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't know how. Writing didn't come until teachers told me that I was good at it. But I'd never really considered that. I didn't know how it worked. I didn't know how writing, producing, directing, I wasn't thinking that far ahead. I'm just watching a movie. But that was the first time I said it would be nice on an incredibly low level to be a part of this as a way of life. But coming from a small town, I don't know how you do that.
So, Blacula, Return of the King, right? That's your kind of continuation of the Blacula story, would you say?
Yep. Yes.
So let me ask you this question. As far as I know, there hasn't been another real take on like a more modern or less exploitative black exploitation version of Blacula. I mean, at least non-comedic. Like we can look at Eddie Murphy, say maybe that's a variation of it. Or maybe even Blade, but I think that's kind of its own thing. Why do you think it's taken this long to get someone else to kind of, continue this story, but in a less exploitative way?
Well, there is someone trying right now to do it, and they reached out to me about possibly writing a script. Their idea is a little different than the idea that you see my idea. I've done an aspect of my idea. I think it is difficult anytime you're dealing with these things are commerce. They're products. They aren't really like just romanticized ideas. They cost money. I think everybody has their own interpretation as to how valuable they are. A lot of times you need like a Ryan Coogler, you need somebody to break through. I had an experience once with a screenplay with my one of my first agents, and he called me one day excited, and he was talking about this huge producer whose names you know, I won't say his name,
Mhm.
but he was like, I love this vampire script. It was set in Compton. And he says, "There's only one problem. It's not enough white people in it." This was a Friday. He's like, "If you can do
Mhm.
something about that by Monday, we might have a deal." So my agent's on me. He's pushing me, pushing me, pushing me. And I think I came up with 5 quality white people to put into this story. And then when we spoke that Monday, he said, this producer said that, if Vampire in Brooklyn didn't work with Eddie Murphy and Wes Craven, maybe the world just doesn't want black vampires. Thanks, kid. And that was it. And the project was
Mhm.
dead.
Yeah.
Um, I just think it's difficult to do. I've been trying to get Philadelphia made for a while. And one of the things I run into as of late is, well, we got sinners. It's
Mhm.
almost like you can have 1,000 versions of Dracula. You can have a
Right.
thousand versions of any other group of vampires. But when it comes to, the African American community, I can think of Death by Temptation, Ganja and Hess,
Mhm.
Blacula, maybe a couple of other sinners, a couple of
Mhm.
others that come to mind, but maybe a handful,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm talking about over 70, 80 years of, these types of films being part of in our world. So I think it's difficult. I think somebody will do it and, they'll do it well. I'm trying to be in the line of people who do that type of thing, but it's
Yeah.
just easier said than done. And I think the cultural specificity that comes with it sometimes is difficult for the industry to nail down because it's not like back in the day where the idea of an African American film is one idea, like we're this one monolithic group. I think there's so many subsections and sections, like with any group of people, to where when you say black, what does that mean?
Right.
Are
Yeah.
you talking about a really, really hood urban experience? Are you talking about
Mhm.
an elite experience? Are you talking about history? Are you talking about all of the above? And then how marketable is that beyond the culture that you're speaking directly to? So I think a lot
Mhm.
of things come into play.
Yeah. No, thanks for explaining that in your perspective. And one of the things I guess becomes a little tricky uh, is, if we only have the black exploitation versions of these films, but then it gets to be this weird taboo. Like, is it okay to like black exploitation in a time where like, there's all this, racial tension and things like that? Well, then what other
Mhm.
representations do we have of that? So it's like we got to see more. So I appreciate you taking on the story and having the interest to continue to do so, because it's definitely something that's needed, I think.
I think a lot of times, we mold and shape our perspectives as to what culture is by what we see on TV and film and media and social media today, because I don't think people interact with each other the same way that back in the
Yeah.
day. I know
Right.
my kids, you had to fight to keep me in the house. Now I got to fight to push my kids out of the
Yeah.
house.
Right.
So it's a completely
Yeah.
different sort of dynamic. I think we move in pods. The people we work
Mhm.
with, the schools we go to,
Yeah.
there isn't a whole lot of really understanding, I think, other people, other cultures, other things. So, film is a great conduit a lot of times to just having a look into somebody else's experience. But the world is so politicized now that I think a lot of times people want to hold on to what they believe more
Yeah.
so than be exposed to have those ideas challenged. It goes outside of their algorithm.
Yeah. You're exactly
And
right.
I
Yeah.
think that's unfortunate. And I think a lot of the polarized nature of what our society is today. I grew up on race humor. I thought it was the greatest thing ever, the Richard Pryors and the
Uh-huh.
Carlins and all of those people. And it never felt like, even though they were jokes and sometimes they were harsh, it never felt like there was anything under them. It never felt like, it's true racism per se. It's just people looking at the differences in other people from their points of view and making it humorous. Now it feels like, people are hurting. And there's a weird kind of how that pain evolves into something at times that can be deadly and frightening.
Yeah.
And, horror for me has always been something that was fun, from whether I was reading Monsters Magazine or Fangoria as a
Yeah.
kid or putting models together of monsters. I never really associated it with, stereotyping of culture or anything like that. I know at times that's been the case. That's part of the history of how Hollywood tells stories, but I never internalized it that way, or at least consciously, maybe on some subconscious level. But as a kid, I think I was just looking, they were fun. Horror movies have stakes, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes those stakes are supernatural. So a conventional solution can't be found. A cop going in with a gun, that doesn't mean the story's over. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean you're safe. It could be Freddy coming through the wall, or something.
Yep.
So that grabbed my attention. I hope the world, figures out what it wants to be and that we can get more types of films from different points of view. That would be great.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Now, you touched on this a little bit earlier where you had said like your teachers had give you like positive feedback saying that you're great at writing, and with your mother also being a teacher, what was it like, just growing up and, having the support system that you had and your teachers kind of giving you that positive feedback to, push you in your career?
It wasn't as literal as that. My mother being a teacher certainly was a help because she always had books around, and
Hmm.
they weren't like Cat in the Hat, and those books were there, but by and large, a lot of the books of the time, whether it was Carl Jung or Alan Watts or some of the protest stuff from the Panthers, like I read things the same way
Hmm.
I saw movies. I read a lot of stuff that probably a child wasn't reading, but even TV, when I look at a lot of the variety shows and talk shows, they would talk about really serious, heady stuff. It wasn't like just even Johnny Carson and those guys and early David Letterman. It wasn't like now where it's just entertainment. They're playing games and they're dancing.
Yeah.
And, it was a lot of different, they would have artists and poets and philosophers and different things. So you were within the music, the Stevie Wonders and the Marvin Gayes and people, there was information constantly being thrown at you. And that reflected itself in the movies. So that sort of helped guide my mind, an imaginative mind in a particular way. I give that to my mom. On the teacher side, I had a teacher, Jay Silberberg, when I was in the eighth grade, I believe. And one day he challenged me to do a paper. I think it was for the school newspaper. And it was the lead article or something. And the way he presented it to me was like, I know you can't do this. I'm going to make a fool of you. You're going to make a fool of yourself. At least that's how my eighth grade mind interpreted it. So I
Hmm.
really put some effort into it, more my ego coming up against what I'm thinking his ego is. And he said to me when he read it, he said, if you put in as much effort being a writer as you do as being a class clown, you might one day turn out to be a really fine writer. And it
Yeah.
was a moment of seriousness where I was like, writer, okay, lawyer, doctor, writer. That sounds smart. And as a big kid, there was always an expectation that whatever I did would be for money in life would have to do with my body. At one time, thinking sports, that wasn't meant to be. But, you know, lifting something, moving something, guarding something. So the fact that someone was sort of speaking to I could do something with my mind and something creative, I'd never really considered that. But again, I didn't see the bridge between where I was in a small town to getting to Hollywood to have this
Yeah.
conversation with you guys.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And it's awesome. And I'm glad, you had that experience because I always tell my kids, look, you're never going to remember the fun teachers. You're going to remember the teachers that push you, you know what I mean? To sit there and
Mhm.
push you and you challenge you. So, I love that story that you were just able to share with us. And now you were able to take your two loves of comic books and horror. What was it like to combine the two into your work now?
um, it's always an honor. When I first started writing comics, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. Someone said, I still don't know what the hell I'm doing. But after two or three series, I was able to sort of find my voice and how to complement art and how to say less with more. If you look at my first Falcon series, the first three issues, a lot of words, a lot of words. And, I'm thinking I'm Alan Moore or somebody that, really, really describes what you're seeing. And over time, I learned how to cut down and cut down and cut down. And Philadelphia was one of those ideas where, all right, this is going to be from the writing point, all me. And being blessed to partner with Jason Sean Alexander, who's an incredible artist, but horror artist in particular, who was able to interpret what I said, only made me better and motivated me to write better or write more specific to comics. Because whether you're talking about movies, comics, podcasts, novels, which I'm working on one now, they're all different cultures. And being able to, compartmentalize how you do something. Like I will do a comic from 7 to 9, and then I'm working on a TV show from 10 to 1, and then I'm working on a movie for the rest of the day. I have to be able to say, okay, what realm am I operating in right now? How do I make that adjustment? And being able to do the blessing of my career is being able to do a lot of different types of things. And it's all story to me at the end of the day, but how I present that story and how that comes out of me is different.
Yeah. So that takes us to the current comic that will be coming out in November, Crownsville. Could you give our viewers and listeners a little synopsis of what Crownsville is going to be all about?
Well, Crownsville is a mental hospital that is still standing today. It's a real place. It's on the outskirts of Annapolis in a town called Crownsville, Maryland. And I grew up in the area. It was always one of those things that I heard about. My grandmother worked there for a short period of time. People who had mental issues went there that I knew from my family, cousins and aunts and that type of thing. And there were always like these whispers of other stories there where experiments were being done on people. If you think the Tuskegee experiment back in the day where men were given syphilis and sort of waiting to rot and see what happened to the body over time. A lot of those types of experiments, articles have come out that people endured that, patients endured that. And there are over, I believe, 2,000 unmarked graves on the property. And when I was thinking about doing a ghost story, because I like to jump around, like I've been in vampires for a while, I did zombies for a minute, I've done werewolves. I wanted to do a ghost story, and I've got a few of them coming, and this is one of them. But one night I went up there, buddy of mine, I just got the notion, because that's what I do sometimes, I get notions. And I just went up there to feel the place, just to say, okay, I've seen pictures, I haven't been up there since I was a kid. And the security guards were trying to shoo us away. And after they figured out why I was there, they were a little bit more cooperative and started telling me ghost stories, things that they've seen there.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, I love The Shining. I love so many haunted house stories. What about a haunted hospital? And that started the wheels turning. But then when you're dealing with history and you're dealing with trauma and tragedy, how do you do it in such a way that you're respecting the actual experience that people endured while still telling a story that is entertaining and moves? So that's sort of what Crownsville is.
Yeah. You kind of just touched on one of the things I was going to ask you about is that history. So when I saw that the title Crownsville, I immediately knew of the hospital. I've visited the hospital, taken some photos in the hospital and some of the abandoned sections. And it's, doing that kind of photography has, you get like a feeling when you're in there of kind of like the things that have happened in the past. Like a lot of those places are left very desolate and decaying. And there's these structures or representations of things that have happened, right? A time that once was, systems in place that no longer are. And a lot of, trauma has happened in those places. Now, I didn't know the full history of Crownsville. And I think I read the synopsis. That was it segregated or was it an all black psychiatric?
It was an
hospital?
all black psychiatric hospital. They may have had periods of segregation, but of desegregation. But for the most part, I've only known it to be a black mental hospital.
Yeah. So, just taking that story, I think is, kind of like what we were touching on earlier, like furthering stories of history and like making sure you pay tribute to it in a way that's like trying to keep it honest, but then create new stories on it. I mean, I feel like that must be challenging because you want to, there's pressure to get it right, but then you're also trying to create something new. So like, how do you toe that line? What systems do you do to make sure like, all right, am I staying true to the original story or being respectful of the original stories?
I've been working on this for about 7 years, on and off. Not because it took 7 years, but just because I'm doing a bunch of other things in between. And in that period of time, I have a friend, Antonia Hilton, who's a correspondent at MSNBC, a journalist, and she wrote a book called Madness about Crownsville. Excellent book. I highly recommend. And in the process of even visiting there with her and talking to her about my experience, she interviewed me for, my grandmother and my experience in being there. And, it started to become real in a sense of telling the story through stories I had heard and through people. And, my grandmother's a character in it. My mother's a character in it. And using the people's voice and the people's emotions and trying to be empathetic with what that experience must have been like. Um, that's sort of the vehicle that I use more so than just talking about it like the highlight is the horrifying place itself.
Yeah.
A place is just a place. The things that happen within the place are the things that make it horrifying.
Absolutely.
And that's what people do to people. And oftentimes, there is no real correction when things like that from history happen. They just happen and then, time moves on. But that's the beauty of the ghost story, that it's able to frame a period of time. It's able to frame grief and pain and trauma. And I do believe that there's a walk, and I believe we do it relatively successfully, of being able to walk with history in such a way that you're honoring it while still being entertained.
One of the things with that you kind of highlighted is there is no correction. There's we're gonna shut it down, right?
Right.
We decided that this is no longer okay to do this, so now we're gonna close these hospitals. And then they don't really realize that actually furthers a lot of problems, because then people are homeless, they have nowhere to go.
Mm-hmm.
There's no actual like thought process to what comes next to replace it. The interesting thing with Crownsville, obviously there's a lot of history around a lot of the negative things that have happened inside that hospital, though. Bright walls, murals. It's like this it's like eerie, like the contrast of like knowing the events that took place, knowing the way people were taken care of, versus like bright blues and oranges and murals and of rainbows and different things. I think that's one of the things that kind of like drew me to like those places, is like you do get that eerie contrast of like, we're going to dress it up nice, but then you'll never understand the pain that happened here.
There is an odd kind of contradiction and I think it's a byproduct of time, as you alluded to, where I'm sure in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, into the 70s, nobody really questioned what was happening at the place. But when you start to get into more modern times and someone goes, hey, this isn't right, this is whatever, the first move, I think, isn't to expose what we've done. I think it's to try to like lighten it. We're going to back away from this, the shock treatment, all of these other things. We're going to back away from these things, and we're going to make this a better place, which I think is a great motivation, to try to make it a better place. The reality is, I think the healing, very few people take into consideration that something has to be done with the pain. That doesn't go away.
Right.
And that, like I said, I think a ghost is a great representative of that, because I can't move on because of what I went through. It's sort of like when you're dealing with someone who's in pain, and sometimes people make it about themselves and they can't relate to somebody else's pain. They can't relate to what someone else is dealing with. And I think it's always necessary to try.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing, like myself and Dave, we work in the mental health field. So we've worked with, patients that, were in hospitals that were kind of shut down for, reasons kind of like different set from what happened in Crownsville. But like you said, dealing with the pain, like myself and Dave worked with, a lot of patients in the field that had to go through those things, what I mean? Like when we go and we bring them back to the site to kind of remember like certain things. It was just, the special moment, of just taking on that, working with people with mental health. Dave, I know you were more on the adult side field of working with those patients directly. What was it like for you to, do that?
In Rhode Island, we have, it's no longer standing, but we have the Ladd Center was our big psychiatric hospital. And there was an individual with disabilities who resided there for many years, and he would actually do walking tours with people and be able to like tell them like this happened here. And he holds a lot of pain. There was a lot of things that were done to him, a lot of things he'd seen. He was kind of abandoned and left there. And it's interesting because when you hear those stories, it's the thing I will say, it's such an interesting thing, kind of like the contrast of the place itself. They'll have these terrible experiences, but then they'll have these other moments where they were able to like find some brightness. Like he remembers getting a haircut. They had like a place that they would do haircuts there. And that would be a thing that he would stand out and have a smile on his face about. Meanwhile, other terrible things were taking place. It's such an interesting dynamic. I'm glad, that you found interest in this enough to be able to kind of like tell some of these stories and bring this theme to people, because I think it's important for people to realize there are people out there who carry that with them or have carried that or experienced these things, and most of us won't.
Well, I'm sure that every culture has their pocket of pain and trauma and all of this stuff, but what happens a lot of times with people who suffer is they grit it out. They figure out a way to suffer well, but the pain isn't really dealt with. I think that and because you don't see it until that person breaks, or you don't see it until that person they can't take it anymore. They've hit their limit. And I know for me personally, being in therapy and personally going through figuring out what's going on inside of me has made it easier to be able to relate to what's going on inside of someone else, to be able to see that. I think when you're walking painful insecurity that I've walked through life with. I think insecurity has its own type of narcissism where you're so concerned that someone's going to see the flawed nature of you that you lose the ability to look at them, and you're just focused on yourself. And once you're able to get out of that into a better place, I think it's easier to connect with other people and to be able to see their pain, feel their pain, and hopefully be an instrument of something that's good. So big advocate of therapy, big advocate of mental health. But, I think as far as history is concerned, finding how you deal with that in generational trauma, which some people don't believe is a thing. I do believe it's a thing because, generations, even if you don't want to go through saying genetically is connected, hurt people, and you teach dysfunction
100%.
teaches dysfunction to other people. And so, grandmothers taught their kids, and then they taught their kids, and it keeps going on and on and on. And it might just be just a setting of believing where your position is in the world, that you're not worthy of good things, or you're not worthy of a positive life, and how that paints and decorates how you see yourself in the world. So again, being able to use, and it seems like if you look at horror films, bringing it back to what we're actually talking about, horror films, horror television, they seem to walk with a reflection of what's happening in the times that they're in. You look at 70s films, you had Vietnam, you had a lot of changes in culture, women's movement, the hippies, the this, the that, civil rights movement. And now you're sort of at a place where it seems to be about the individual. So what's affecting people, how people feel. You see horror kind of speaking to that a little bit more, being more intimate, being more insular than just the movies I grew up on, where you had a vampire in a carriage, in London someplace with the Hammer films. And now it's about somebody who's being picked on in college, and they're being bullied, and a demon gives them an opportunity to get revenge, that type of thing. It's sort of the world that we seem to be in now.
Nice. Now, I had the opportunity to, go down to San Diego Comic-Con for press. I noticed you were also in attendance. What were some of the highlights for this year's convention for you?
Oh, this was a quick one for me. The year before last, I was there the whole time, and they hosted me, and they gave me an ink pot, and it was wonderful. And this year I was like, okay, I got 4 panels. I've got 2 horror-themed things I've been invited to. I was in and out, literally. Comic-Con has gotten to a thing. I remember I was so excited in the Comic-Cons in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and it wasn't as many people, wasn't as busy, wasn't as all of that. Now it's become almost like a business, like a convention of publishers and editors and, meeting people and dinners and official, I just want to get in and get out. And
Right.
the older I get, the less people-y I get. So I just want to get in and out.
I can
So
understand
it
that
was
one.
good.
Yeah.
It was good. I moved in
Yeah.
and out.
There you go. Now, this question comes from our buddy Mark. He would like to know what dream project or franchise would you be interested in exploring? And if you had the chance, which horror TV show would you bring back?
Well, always Philadelphia comes to mind in adapting. I mean, trying to figure out what the magic is in that because I believe in it. But Kolchak the Night Stalker would be the TV show I would resurrect from the dead if I could. I love that show. Darren McGavin having been the star and having a unique sense of sardonic humor along with the passion of a journalist. I don't know how that would manifest itself in today's world because journalism isn't a thing anymore. But certainly not in the way that it was back in the 70s. But that would be a show that I would want to bring back from the dead. Yeah.
Awesome.
There you go.
Awesome. Rodney, thank you so much for this conversation. It is like such a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah.
You have so many interesting and just thought-provoking things to share. So thank you so much for that. And I can't tell you how excited I am for Crownsville. Really, really can't wait to dig into that. So for anyone listening, again, it's on sale November 5th. Rodney, can you tell people where they can pre-order or put in their orders for that?
I think, your local comic shop for sure. I know I'm not supposed to say Amazon, but that place. But I think right now the cutoff is either coming or right upon us,
Okay.
All right. So if you can't get it by the cutoff, make sure you take a look when that releases. And Rodney, just share also where people can find you and where they can tune into the podcast and all that good stuff.
At the Rodney Barnes on Twitter and Instagram is where I'm most active. Every once in a while, TikTok. I don't completely understand TikTok, so not as much as the others. And what was the other question?
The podcast.
Run Fool is on Spotify, Amazon Music, any place that you consume, find podcasts, you will find Run Fool.
Great. All right, everybody. Rodney Barnes, Crownsville, November 5th. Get your hands on it and check out Run Fool. And we will see you next week with a new episode. Thanks for tuning in. See ya.